Welcome to Navigate STL Schools, a podcast. We are here today with Mr. Jack. Jack, introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, first of all. My name's Jack Krewson. I'm the co-founder, chief strategy officer of Kairos Academies. We are a personalized learning and student agency focused public charter middle school in South St. Louis. So middle and growing up through high. So we have through 11th graders this year.
Okay, that's a lot of words. But before we get into that part, let's talk about your personal K-12 education story.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of pieces to this, and I'm going to try to condense it down to the most important points. I grew up here in the city of St. Louis. I was fortunate to go to some pretty progressive private elementary schools, but I grew up in a neighborhood where that wasn't everybody's experience. And so I started to see really early as I began to understand, what was going on around me, that there were unequal trajectories in life depending on the kinds of educational opportunities that you got. I ended up going to private school in the county, and then I ended up going to Washington University where I studied political science and economics, and really was curious about why does society look the way it does, right? What are the things in our society that create equitable systems and unequitable systems? And it kept pointing back to this opportunity that students get really early. And I think about that a lot as I went to teach through Teach for America at an area high school in St. Louis that has struggled somewhat, right? And that deals with, a history and a past of oppressive policies that put it there, to be honest, and have seen a really stark reality between my experience, the things I care about, and the access and opportunities that other people get. And so my whole reason for Kairos, for being in education, is I think everybody deserves the opportunity to choose a life that they want to live and to choose a path that they really care about. And they deserve to be empowered by the adults around them to be able to do that, right? And if we're being honest, that's not happening for a lot of kids right now.
You gave us a little brief description of Kairos when you introduced yourself, Jack. What exactly is Kairos Academies?
Yeah, so first, Kairos is ancient Greek for the opportune moment or time, and that's what we think
like
this
a
is.
Chiron.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It's like the kind of time that's not chronological, right? But is a certain moment. And we think we find ourselves at one of those moments in our history and education here in America, which is we have this influx of technology, and we have a lot of know-how for how to teach kids well. We have schools that are working across the country to serve students who are historically disadvantaged. We have some information here, and we want to put it all to bear in one school. And so our mission is to empower students to direct their own lives in learning. That requires a different kind of school model, a school model that focuses on students' ability to make choices for themselves and practice making those decisions. We make a lot of those choices for kids in traditional school, and we think when you get to college and get to the real world and there's no one there holding your hand, that should not be the first time you practice making that decision. So that's really the core of our focus. And in order to get students there, we also have a personalized learning model, which is just the idea that we want to meet kids where they are and help them follow their own path to proficiency. We don't want to give a one-size-fits-all to every kid. So that's our core. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And we're on the road, right? There's some things we're doing really well and some things we're still improving on. And, I hope to be really candid and honest about where we are in that process through this conversation.
Okay, so personally, I agree with you. I think that as a society, we are doing education wrong. I think that I am on record saying this a bunch, that we are educating children for a future that no longer exists.
Right.
And so if you keep doing schools like kids are going to go work in factories, they are not going to be able to succeed in 2024 and beyond. And so you mentioned this idea of a personalized learning plan. Is that like an IEP?
Yeah, so IEP, for folks who may not be familiar, is nomenclature for an individualized education plan. It's a special education terminology, and it's what we give to students when we recognize that they have trouble accessing the main curriculum. But it comes with this, we recognize you may have a learning disability or you have something keeping you from engaging. we basically think every kid should have an IEP, not the official legal document, but a personalized path or a personalized trajectory through their education. And that's what we try to provide to students. It requires a lot more support, right? So we also have to give students not just teachers in their classes, but a one-on-one mentor, someone to meet with them every week, every other week, to see, where are you at in this process? What are your next steps? Not what should everyone in the class do, but what's right for you. And that's a key part of that process.
Okay, so you guys start at middle school, right?
We start in 5th grade. Yeah, non-traditional grade to start in, but...
Okay. 7-fold. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so we're starting in 5th grade. What does an individualized, personalized learning plan look like for a 5th grader versus a 10th grader?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways we can go with this question. I first want to name, there is what does the ultimate vision of what this looks like? What is that in the future? And where are we now? Right?
I'm with where are we now? Because I see the future and I want to talk about that too. But like practically, if I'm a parent and I'm just like, oh, well, my kid isn't really doing well in like a full classroom environment, and I'm looking for somewhere different for them to go. Like, what does it look like for a 5th grader to have their personal learning plan versus when they get to high school?
9th, 10th, 11th. Yeah, definitely. So in 5th grade, we think about choices as where you work, when you work, how you work, right? In 5th grade, we don't want to give students a million choices about that because they're just learning how to handle those kinds of choices. So it still happens inside the classroom. So we have project-based classes with teachers as facilitators, and you might see independent practice in that classroom where different kids can work on different things, right? And they can have choices within that for, hey, I think because of where I am, I should work on this. And that's something they talk to their mentor about. So it doesn't look super different to the outside observer, except if you came in that classroom during that time, it wouldn't be sage on the stage, right? A teacher in the front of the classroom lecturing kids. It would be kids in stations or different small groups working on different materials. This is best practice in education. There are lots of places who do this part well. The question is, how do you ladder up from that to, an 11th grader who has gone through 2 years of our Next Prep program, and they've set a mission and a vision for their life and their goals, and they've identified aligned career paths and choices. Mm-hmm.
Your 11th grader 2 years ago made a education
9th grade. Who am I?
Plan. Like, who do I want to be? What's my mission, vision, and values? And like,
and what are careers aligned with that? Okay. And what are the steps I need to take in high school to get there? I found this in my experience teaching math at the high school level. I had a student, Jordan, who, I'll come back to it, but came into class and, first day, sits down with me, comes in at lunch and wants to be a doctor, right? And has no idea what the steps are to get there, is behind in math, is behind in English. And the conversation gets really discouraging at that point because we failed to sort of set that student up. And so by starting in 9th grade, we say, you need A's in math and science for the rest of high school, right? We need to expose you to an externship with Barnes-Jewish Hospital. We need you to look at all of the different ways that you could be involved in the health field. And then we need to align you with a college and career advisor that's going to help you access those choices after Kairos. And that starts again in 9th grade, because if you wait till 10th or 11th grade to think about what do you want to do in the world, you may have missed that. You may have already had to do things and you miss those opportunities. Mm-hmm. So we really want to avoid, that kind of situation that happened to Jordan. So that's one way choice looks different in the high school than in the middle school. So we have this Next Prep program that's really aligned around long-term vision. Who do you want to be? But also just for classwork, we have flexibility for students to, think if you're in college, you've got the library and the student union, and you have time to decide, I got to do schoolwork, but what am I going to work on now? And where am I going to do it? And who am I going to work with? It looks a little bit more like that, right? Mm-hmm. So students have choices to work outside of the classroom and decide how to use that time. Do I meet with my peers to work on this project? Do I do a little studying for math? Like, what is the thing that I need to get done this week? Without somebody looking directly over my shoulder. And I'll name, this is in the early stages because this is a new idea. How do you do mini college in high school? But we do have spaces during the day where kids are not confined to a classroom and they make a decision about where to work and what to work on. So 2 sort of divergent examples, but fifth grade in the classroom, a little bit of choice there. High school, you have both this career program through Next Prep and also more flexibility to move physically in the space and kind of operate as a dress rehearsal for college.
I love this idea. As the kid that used to be literally in math, how do you want me to use this? What am I going to be doing with sine, cosine, and tangent? Tell me why this is a practical use of my time, and very much knew what college I was going to and what I thought I was going to major in and all these things. And so I love this idea of autonomy. My question is like a little concern, right? Who is teaching these kids how to make decisions? So I love that you said in fifth grade, the decision looks like, which station do you want to go to?
Sure.
We have 4 activities you can participate in. Which station do you want to go to? I guess my question is there some sort of character education component to this that helps kids figure out how and when and what types of decisions are available to them and how to make them?
Yeah.
Or is it just vibes?
No, it's not just vibes. We run on lots of systems at Kairos, right? And so that is the purview, when talking about who's responsible, the purview of their mentor. Every kid has a one-on-one mentor that's assigned to them when they come to Kairos. They have a dedicated space with their peers and that mentor in advisory. That happens every day, and that's where we do more whole group instruction on, hey, what are your goals for this week? Make sure they're set. We're talking about, specific things like, how do I calendar my time? How do I break things down into small chunks, these little executive functioning strategies, but also just a space for community. And then within that, at one point in the week, they'll have a one-on-one check-in with that mentor, personalized to them. Hey, what were your goals for last week? How'd we do? Okay, what went wrong with that? We call it OCS. What was the outcome there? What was the cause of that outcome if it wasn't what we wanted? What's the solution or the next step that we're going to take? And then same thing, okay, next week, what do you think are our next steps to keep moving forward? And it's really through the process of setting a goal, trying to reach it, reflecting with the mentor about what worked, what didn't work, that students build that muscle.
Oh, so like if this were a computer program, we call it agile. So like we're working in sprints toward our goal.
Yeah, okay. And every student has to meet the same content standards in classes, but the path that kids take to get there is going to be different, right? And that's where this kind of agile piece comes in. We think real learning about executive functioning and choice making isn't a matter of like lecturing kids about, here's what growth mindset is, and here's this, and that stuff's good, it's important, but the realness is practice, right? Like in your own life, when you have to try these things, you're like, I calendared this much time for this last week and I didn't get it done. And I need to think about when I'm doing a big project like this, I really need 4 hours of uninterrupted time. And I'm going to do that next week, right? And it's this quick, tight learning loop. That is really how we think we teach that, through the mentor, through that time we have set aside.
So can a kid start Kairos in 9th grade, or do we need to come up from 5th or 6th grade to be able to have those skills in that level by the time they're in the high school program?
They can start in 9th grade. And this is where we get into, if you were to ask me, what is the biggest challenge we're facing right now? And I think, how does it connect to something that might be really relevant for parents who might be listening to this podcast? And, how do you pick a good school? And what goes into that is, our students come into 5th grade 3 and 4 years behind grade level sometimes, right? Not everybody, but a good chunk of our students. And same when we get to 9th grade, some of those gaps can actually be widened or exacerbated depending on which school that they were in. And we don't shy away from that fact. We exist as a school because we know the existing school system isn't working, right?
As well as it should be.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are bright spots, but as a whole, are we getting there?
Yeah,
no, we're not.
Yeah.
And so how do we focus on our critical student intervention groups? So students who come in 2 or more years behind, and catch them up at the same time as we're teaching these executive functioning skills. And that's the real challenge. So if I come in 9th grade and I'm 2 or 3 years behind, the choices that I might have, that time that's set aside for what we call choice time, might be devoted to an intervention block to help the student catch up. Because it's this dance and recognizing, like, our primary goal, we have to make sure you leave us reading on grade level, ready for collegiate level coursework. And it's this balance between dedicating time to that and dedicating time to letting you practice this choice-making cycle and kind of get feedback there.
So what does that look like for a classroom teacher for a high school student? Because I could see how the station's motto makes sense. Like I can see, hey guys, this is free time. We have 4 stations that can house 10 students each. There are 20 kids in the classroom, which means all like y'all can pick 2 things, or everybody can go do their own thing. This one will help with math. This one will help with science. This independent reading, X, Y, and Z, right? I see that for a contained classroom for maybe 2 hours a day, like a period a day where kids are able to make those choices and figure it out. But when you get into a high school level, like what does that look like for a classroom teacher when you're switching blocks and everything else?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think about it is like a free period.
Okay.
Right? And so we still have math and science and history and English class, like right? It's facilitated by an instructor. We have an advisory period where we're doing a lot of that mentoring work that I was just talking to you about. And then if a student has a free period block in that day, if that's something they don't need to use for an intervention or extra work on math or English, that's the period and the space they have that flexibility in. And different grade levels do that differently. And we actually try to empower each group to pilot different ideas at those grade levels for what works and what doesn't work for their students. Because sometimes it's different year to year. But imagine if I have a free period, I can go work in the library, or I can go work in the lunchroom, or I can choose to work in a little flexible space outside the classroom. Or if my teacher has a free period, I can go to office hours with them. That's kind of how that looks. So a really easy backwards map is, what does the free time in college look like? And how should kids use that time during the day, right?
And
map that into,
course.
Yes, of course. But yeah, how do we kind of backwards plan that into the high school? We're at what I would name as a minimum viable product of this right now. We have a space and a place for kids who've earned that choice to work outside of the classroom. And what we need to get to is, what are the little baby steps to get every kid up to that level? And how do we make sure it's consistent for a kid who comes in later versus earlier?
And how is this working for you guys?
Yeah, I think, how do you measure executive functioning growth is sort of the question. Like,
no, really, how do you do it?
Yeah, there are surveys that you can take for social emotional learning that measure growth mindset and these things. Panorama is a great one, but they're not great at measuring progress because they're full of all sorts of reference bias. Meaning, if I'm a kid and I don't know anything about growth mindset and you ask me, how's your growth mindset? I might be like, yeah, I'm awesome at that. 5 out of 5, right? And then I learn all about growth mindset and how I respond to challenges. I'm a little more reflective about it. And I may actually be better than I was before, but you ask me, 6 months later, I'm probably going to rate myself more like a 3 out of 5 because I see what it looks like to be a 5 out of 5. And so that's a challenge. We don't think that's effective to measure growth. It's important data for the student and for the teacher, but that doesn't tell us where we're at. Ultimately, it's how much choice can you handle and still get your stuff done, right? The more choice you can handle, the more freedom you can handle and still use that for a good purpose. That's the ultimate measure. And that's something we're trying to figure out, right? So how well academically do our students who have choice do compared to students who don't? That's one way to look at it.
Oh, how do you guys know that? Like, is that something you guys are actively measuring? Like, are there balances, like highs and lows? Like, hey, everybody starts off with 50 free minutes a day, and you can have up to 180. I'm making these numbers up. This is all for example. You have up to 180 free minutes a day. And as well as they're able to handle their level of responsibility, do they earn more or lose more like of that ability to have choice in their day?
That is the core idea.
Okay.
And we've tried different versions of this over different years to see what works. Ultimately, we've landed back on this idea that there's too much confounding data in that because of where students come in. So our real focus right now, our whole organizational philosophy around our academics, and what I would encourage parents to consider when they look at a school is around student growth, right? So if a student is operating in those systems and they're continuing to grow a ton year over year, meaning not like if I'm a student and I'm in 8th grade, am I testing at 8th grade level, right? We want that for every kid, right? But if I came in at a 5th grade level and at the end of the year I'm at a 7th grade level, man, I made 2 years of growth right there. That's incredible work. That kid deserves, a pat on the back, and so do their teachers, and everyone should be proud of that. But when we think of a proficiency measure or state test, that kid shows up as not proficient, right?
So, quick question, because this is actually what spurred the catalyst for this conversation. Can you explain to our audience in academic and then slightly layman's terms,
Sure.
because that was a really great example, what is growth and how is it measured versus what is proficiency and how is it measured? And I'll ask my follow-up to that at the end.
Yeah, I'll start with maybe the little bit more academic explanation, and then I'll give the simple one. So the academic explanation is that every year kids take a state test, and that state test is only on content for the grade level they're in. So if I'm a 6th grader, it's only 6th grade math stuff. It's not going to have my multiplication tables from 4th grade. It's not going to have that other stuff. And at the end of the year, I test on that, and basically I just get a grade that tells me how close am I to being on grade level. Am I below basic, meaning I'm not close? Am I basic, which these are their actual phrases. I think we need to think about that language a little bit. But am I basic, meaning I can kind of do some of the basic skills with a grade level? Am I proficient, like, yep, I'm on grade level, or advanced? Am I knocking this out of the park and I'm probably ready for higher level stuff? That's proficiency. And it doesn't capture movement for any kid who's below the 6th grade level, which I said a lot of kids in St. Louis are, right? And so growth, in contrast to that, is, well, let's say I come in and I test, and I test at a 5th grade level at the beginning of the year. We're going to test at the end of the year and see where you land.
Let's pause. So if I'm in 6th grade and I come in and at the beginning of the year I get a test.
Yep.
And the test is over everything from 5th grade or everything from 6th grade?
Yeah, this is great. So it's a test called the NWA MAP. It's an adaptive test. And that means it's the entire spectrum of math, right? From kindergarten to 12th grade.
So there's like this is section kindergarten, this is section 1st grade, section 2nd grade. Well,
and it'll ask you questions. In layman's terms, it'll ask you harder and harder questions until you get one wrong. And then you get one right and you get one wrong. And then it kind of dials in, where are you at in this subject on this whole continuum from kindergarten to 12th grade? And it'll give you a score for that. And it'll tell you, in rough terms, where on grade level are you? So you're a 6th grader, you come in, maybe it tells you at the beginning of the year that you're at a 4.5 grade level. You're in between 4th and 5th grade level. You'll test again at the end of the year and see where it places you. And the difference is the growth, right? So 4.5 grade level all the way to, let's say I grew to the 7th grade. That's huge growth, but we've seen it. It's 2.5 years of growth. The reason we like that is that shows you what is the school doing for your child, not where did they come in or what's this stuff happening before. It is possible for your student to be off track, not to be proficient, but to be doing a great job, and for their school to be doing a great job because they're growing a ton year over year. And ultimately, of course, if they keep doing that, they're going to catch up to grade level and they're going to be proficient.
Okay. And then proficiency is just either you know it or you don't.
Think about it like being right on grade level. If you test proficient in that grade level subject, that means, yep, I know my 7th grade math, right? Or yep, I know my 6th grade math, whatever the concept is.
Okay. And so one of the things that we always talk to parents about is this idea of a growth score, because as you stated, there are lots of things that affect a child's ability to learn that don't have anything to do with the school building that they are in.
Absolutely.
And so I think that sometimes, whether that be charter schools, SLPS schools, or even private schools, they get a reputation based off of what is happening on that test in that building.
Right.
And because we understand how education adjacent issues could impact a child, is really difficult to go to school and care about geometry, which is an example we just brought up.
Yeah.
If our lights are not on.
Sure.
And if my cat died,
Definitely.
or if, I don't know where my next meal is coming from, or, my parents are taking us on a really exciting vacation and I just don't want, because anything could impact the child's ability to learn. It doesn't always have to be poverty, but we also know that poverty is one of those factors. We also know that social situations in neighborhoods and parents' income and family situations, life or death issues are all of these factors. And so maybe in my previous education or in my previous life, I wasn't getting the support that I needed, the meals that I needed. And so when I go to school, maybe, I just really didn't have the energy to learn everything or to focus or to be able to retain. And so I could come into a school at third grade level in eighth grade, and I could get to seventh grade, and you have taught me 4 years worth of information in 7 months, which means that I was attentive. I wanted to learn from my teacher. The subjects felt relevant. They were easy to assess and understand, and I did well. But I'm still failing. And I think that that's what ends up happening to a lot of schools. And so we assume that those schools are not teaching children and they're setting those children up for failure. However, I could be the ideal student who's had 3 meals a day. I come from a very wealthy and full home. I take horseback riding. I do all of the things. And I come in to 7th grade knowing everything that I should know to be in 7th grade. And then 7th grade teaches me everything I need to get to 8th grade. What school did a better job?
Right. Clearly the school, in my opinion, that helped that student grow 4 years. Right.
Now.
And that is, I think, the thing that we should be looking at. Because to put what you just said in like my favorite nerd speak is that proficiency correlates with socioeconomic status. If you look at it, it's because poverty influences in the ways that you outlined a student's ability to learn in the school, but doesn't correlate with growth. That means that no matter where you live or where you come from, you can grow on that test and make progress. And if we keep doing that, we identify the schools that do that and encourage students to go to those schools, then they will, at a certain point, bust that correlation between, income and proficiency in a subject level, which is what we ultimately want to see.
And so I guess now, part 2 of this example, we are rewarding the schools who can take kids that are doing what they're supposed to be doing to get to the next level. And we are punishing schools that are helping kids get to where they need to be so that they can be competitive. And so we tend to think that the best schools in the city or in the region are the schools with the highest test scores.
And the highest income.
And
they correlate, I'm telling you.
Well, I know they do. And you know they do. For the most part. I am aware of the fact that the top 10 reading scores in St. Louis City for 3rd grade, 9 of those 10 are from selective enrollment schools that you either have to apply to or gain admission into. One of them is a neighborhood school, but all of them are majority white. I'm aware of that, but not all parents are. And so they will look at, and no shade to anybody, a SOPS neighborhood school and say, oh, they're failing children. And we should be going to this private school or this magnet school or this charter school because they have higher test scores. And I think that then sometimes those schools struggle to maintain their academic rigor, for a politically correct way to say that, because they are not necessarily equipped to...
They don't get the attention and resources and everything.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so my question to you is that as we're looking at these environments, noting what we know about some of the academic profiles that you stated of students that are coming in Kairos, we have just explained to the audience the difference between proficiency and growth. How would you recommend that parents start to evaluate these schools when they're making a choice on where to send their kids? Because unfortunately, there isn't a lot of information out of those lower performing schools that says if you have a high performing student who is in an environment that prioritizes growth, this is how much they can grow. Because normally the high performing students are skimmed off the top like milk and put into like gifted and talented programs. So how, if I am a parent, that wants to have a child that is academically proficient, but also growing and getting the needs that they have met,
Mm-hmm.
how should I be evaluating those two scores?
Yeah, I think that my advice is to basically entirely ignore proficiency and look at growth.
Okay.
And what I want to be clear about is you should be very discerning and you should ask lots of questions of the school about growth. That a school that has low growth and low proficiency is a bad school, and we have to be able to name that, right? And it's not okay for a school to continually not help students grow, right? From wherever they start from. That's a school's job. So I want to be really clear, like, I'm not making an excuse for a school that doesn't help students learn. We need to be really clear about that. I would say that's where growth comes in. You've got to look really clearly, like, how much are students growing year over year? Look at the APR report, which you have data from that on your website, right? Our students come in really far behind. We're a little bit above the city average in terms of proficiency because we see strong growth over time. But if you look at our growth scores for our district, we met 100% of the possible points for growth in English and in science last year across all grade levels. And at the high school level, we earned 100% of growth points across every subject, both for subgroups, students who are historically underserved, and for the general student population. And that tells us there's something working there, even if the proficiency score is not there. And so that's what I would encourage parents to look at. How are the schools that you're looking at helping students grow from where they are to where they want to be? Because that's the impact of the school. Everything else happened before the kid got there, right? Everything else is outside factors. If you want to know the school's good, you look at growth.
Okay, so if I'm a school with high proficiency and low growth, does that just mean, these kids know everything that they're supposed to know, and so we're keeping them right where they need to be?
I think the basics are when you calculate growth, you say, okay, a student is here. We'll give it an index of, they have a 90%, right? If I have a 90%, my expected growth by the end of the year is smaller. Maybe it's 2 points to a 92, right? But if I came in at a 70%, my expected growth would be higher. Maybe it's 8 points to 78, right? And so you can still be, if all your kids are proficient, you can still be high growth, right? You can still have lots of your kids meeting their growth target for, growing 1 year's worth in 1 year's time. So I want to be clear about that. Just because you have high proficiency doesn't mean you can't be high growth. But if you are high proficiency and you're not high growth, it's worth considering, what is perpetuating the achievement of those students. If the school is really low growth, you'd see those kids come off track at some point, right? Because if I'm not growing a year in a year's time, I'm falling behind and falling behind and falling behind. And at some point, I'm going to be less proficient. So it's very rare that you find a school that's high proficiency and really low growth because they wouldn't stay high proficiency for long, if that makes sense.
Interesting. And so this is like an off-topic or off-track question, kind of. So I hear you say that, but then that makes me wonder about like the idea of academic burnout. So when we get into college, which is what Kairos is preparing students for by focusing on their opportunity for autonomy, decision-making, choice, and ownership over their academic goals, a lot of times students who have been in those high academic, high proficient environments are the ones that really struggle when they are placed into that college environment. And so how are we creating balance in that atmosphere? Because I think that one might argue, for the sake of argument, that, okay, well, you're giving these kids all this autonomy, but they still are not academically prepared for college.
Sure. Yeah, I would just say, I think that it's not, there are two dimensions. There's student academics and there's student executive functioning skills, right? And it is true that there are a lot of kids who are really academically strong that still have low executive functioning skills because it's skill and drill all day long, or they haven't gotten to practice making decisions for themselves. And those are the kids who struggle when they get to college, even though they had a strong, instructional or academic background. On the flip side, if you know how to teach yourself something and you know what you care about, you have a strong motivation and sense of purpose, and you have good executive functioning skills, you know how to get yourself there. If you come into college a little academically behind, you can figure out how to chart your path towards doing it well, right? And so we actually think that, yes, a baseline of academic achievement is really important for every kid. You can't go into college not knowing how to read, right? That would prevent you from engaging with anything, right? Yes. So there's a place there, right? Where can we access the information? It's about access and opportunity. But the real key is their executive functioning skills, because you get into the real world and you start to see this as an adult. It's not always the kids who got straight A's that figured out a life of purpose and found success in whatever way that means to them. It's a lot of times these kids who know what they want, they know who they are, and they know how to travel the road to get there. So that's what I would emphasize in any school, regardless of your academic background. We need to be focusing more on these, people call them non-cognitive skills. I think that's kind of insulting, right? Obviously, we're using our brain for it. But people call them soft skills. I think, they're incredibly important. You make a good impression or a bad impression on an employer in the face of these skills. And so I think we need to spend more time on them, and we need to think about how do we teach them, because it's not the same as the way we teach math. You can't just sit kids down and say, here's how you make choices.
This is how you be kind.
Right. Exactly.
This is how you make choices.
You got to practice.
This is how you have empathy.
And coach.
Yes.
And and that's the focus.
So I love this idea of how do we integrate quote unquote soft skills into education. You've created your own school, so obviously you must have an opinion on this. But as a whole, how do we improve this idea of public education so that we are actively preparing students to participate in the public?
I love this question because I think there's sort of a meta connection to this whole conversation we've been having about growth. First, we have to know how to measure it so we know who's doing it well and who's not. There are different ways to get kids to be good at math. What we care about is at the end of the day, kids are good at math, right? And different schools can take a different approach to that. There are different ways to help students develop their executive functioning. And I think we're even further away from knowing what's the right answer on that. But we have to have a strong measure. So for academic performance, that one category, it's growth, right? Very clearly it's growth. That's the impact of the school on that student's learning. But for executive functioning, we don't have a good measure of that. And if we don't have a good way to measure it, we don't have a good way to understand who's doing it well. And we don't have a way to reward the schools and programs that are supporting things like that. Funders can't give you money on the basis of no data. I mean, these are things we know. And so I think it starts first with, how do we measure this? And I think a good idea would be, and one we're kicking around, is, your college and career attainment. What's the ultimate measure of how good you are at this? It's, do you know how to navigate the systems around you to get the things you want and need? So it'd be tracking that more longitudinally. And there are lots of schools who got, this isn't a Kairos unique thing. KIPP has done a lot of this work recently at their national level. Many schools track students through college and career. But I think it would just be looking at it through a lens of that kind of long-term student attainment. So first step, measure it well, and then figure out what the models are that are working. This is exactly what we do for academics. Where are the places that stand out? And see, can we share those practices not only citywide, but nationwide? And Kairos really hopes to be an example of that. There are lots of schools dancing around this same idea and doing it in different ways. And we have this approach that's yep, you learn through this feedback loop with the mentor and making choices. And if that works the way we think it should, we'll have our first graduating class next year, and we'll get to follow them and what they do next. We want to be able to share those things with other folks.
What are the markers of success that you guys are looking for your first graduating class in their first year of college?
Yeah, so we have a student graduate profile, and this is something I can share with you if we want to, post it with the thing. Our kids helped us come up with this, our families, our teachers, and it describes what that person is like more than saying
what they've achieved.
Right. And, some general pieces that you may not find. It's not like you just need to get this on an ACT or you need to do that. It's about, being an advocate for themselves. It's about knowing how to make decisions. It's about being caring with other people. It's about knowing who they are and who they want to be in the world. And yes, it's about reaching a certain threshold of an ACT so that they have a chance to access, college level careers, right? Or that they have a concrete next step outside of that in a career or technical training program. They're going to be an apprentice somewhere. They're, joining another community college program. There are lots of pathways to what that success looks like. And, we sort of stole that concrete next step language from Summit Public Schools out of California. And we like that idea. It's that the world we live in today doesn't require every kid. It isn't accessed for every kid through a college or a traditional university. But our job as a school is to prepare every kid to be able to do that if that's the path that they're on. So there's some standard, you need to be able to get into a college to pursue that if you want to. You need to have a clear next step of where you're going. And those are more quantitative. And then there's a more qualitative description, basically describing, do you have these kinds of executive functioning skills? Have we empowered you to know who you want to be and how to relate to other people? All the things we all would say are really important, but are really hard to measure.
In 5 years, Kairos was successful if?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it ties to this first graduating class and our first few.
Oh, that's why I picked 5 years, because then they would have graduated from college if that's what they choose.
What percent matriculate from the program of their choosing, their concrete next step? That's going to be a big measure.
So how will they stick to their 9th grade plan?
Or not even stick to, but, because we all set plans and then we realize this isn't actually the right path and we adjust and that they have followed through on a plan of their choosing in that way. I think, we're graduating students who have the baseline academic skills across the board to engage in any college. But, more than that along the way, that student growth remains really strong, right? Because we know we can't educate every child in the city of St. Louis. We know that students are going to come to us from different educational backgrounds. And so we need to get good at catching kids up fast. And so I think you'd see particularly our critical student intervention population, right? That group that comes in behind, you'd see growth for them where 70% of those kids are hitting or exceeding their annual growth goals. And that'd be a really targeted number for us.
70%.
Yeah, which would mean that the vast majority of kids every year are growing more than 1 year at a time, right? Okay. So over years and years, they're going to catch up and they're going to be ready.
I do want you to know by the 1980s grading scale, you gave yourself a D.
Yeah, the 70%. But this is I think important for the conversation about the difference between growth and achievement. If you grow a little bit every day, little changes, 1% changes every day, that's going to add up to something big in the long term. That's going to add up to a kid who's academically ready for college and can make those choices. So that's the leading indicator we care most about.
But I made that statement because I also think that it's really important to understand how things change. Because when I was in school, a 70% was a D and I was failing a class. Now, a 70% on a 10-point scale is a C and it's showing progression. But if I got a 70% return on something that I invested in,
that part
is amazing. And so I think that is one of the ways that when we talk to parents, we try to learn about what is important in a school. Is it important how it's measured, or is it important what you earn from it? And I think that that's another really interesting way to look at growth. If you invested 6 months into this student,
how many months do you get out in learning?
How many months do you get out in learning? And that is going to take me back to my next question for you is, given how you all view growth, how you all view development at the institution of Kairos, who should be seeking out this institution when they're trying to think about what they want for themselves as a family, but also for their student or for themselves as a student, thinking about their academic career? What types of students would be successful in this environment? And that's not shade to say that as a charter school, you're cherry picking your students, but understanding that not everybody is able to learn the same ways in every environment. And so some people need different educational structures. If I am a parent who wants to exercise education choice, what would make my child, I don't know, that's a weird way to say this, but what types of children would succeed in this environment? And that's not from a racial background, what do I need to want and get from this?
Yeah, so we definitely believe that there are different kinds of models in schools that best serve the needs of individual students, that everybody's different. Individual, right? Yep, exactly. And so, we would recognize that they were really interested in medicine and bioscience. They knew that's what they were going into. We have schools in St. Louis that are narrowly focused on that. That might be a good choice, right? At Kairos, we do try to take a broader approach. So, as a charter school, we're totally open enrollment. Anyone can apply to be at Kairos. We have no selection criteria for students to get in. As long as we have a seat, a student can get in. And that's really core to our mission, right? That every kid should have access to an education like the one we believe we can provide. But I think the students who do best at Kairos are students who want to learn to take charge over their own life, right? If that resonates with you, that you're a parent or that you're a student who really wants to think about who do I want to be and how do I get there, and have the adults around you really engage with you on that question, and to see your school not just as a box to check, like a thing you have to do, but as a means to the end or the kind of person that you want to be. Those kids really grab Kairos by the horns, right? We have the systems to support you in doing that. We have lots of opportunities for folks to explore. And ultimately, we're biased, but we think those are the best kind of people, the people who learn to do that. I would also say, if that sounds nice but hard to you, we got you. Like, that's the point of a school that teaches you how to do this stuff. How to be empowered as a student. So if you want that agency to kind of drive that learning, that's a spark for a lot of folks who join us and really thrive.
And I really love this idea on this executive function. Outside of that key component, right?
Yeah.
Is teaching students executive function. Y'all are clearly cornering the market. I don't see a lot of schools really pushing that to the forefront, even if it is a part of their curriculum. But what do you think that Kairos is adding to the education landscape? Like, what need is the school filling, not feeling like emotions, but filling for the community?
Yeah.
And how can they find you and take advantage of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a lot of ways to answer it. I'm going to answer it in two directions. The first direction is there just are not enough schools in St. Louis that are helping students grow. And when you think about just instruction and what are the results of our kids, that's clear at Kairos, right? Our students are growing year over year in a way that is helping to slowly erase gaps that they may have come into us in 5th and 6th grade. That's really important. And we're not the only school doing that, but there aren't enough to serve every kid in St. Louis. And until there are, we should not stop trying to do more to serve kids. The second piece really is what you identified. It's about teaching kids how to think critically about who they want to become, how to relate to other people, and then how to learn the tactical skills to get there. How do I set a calendar? How do I set a good goal? How do I manage and marshal my resources towards the kind of person that I want to become? Not have other people decide what that should be for me. We think that's super important, and I think that's really the unique piece about our school.
Oh, wow. So how do I not let other people define who I want to be for me?
Yeah.
That's super dope for a 5th grader to think about.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people don't believe that kids are able to have executive functioning in that way.
Yeah.
That when you're in a classroom, you're supposed to do things like the teacher said so that you can get an A on the test. And there is, especially in younger grades, not often a lot of reflection on how what you're learning, whether that be the actual 1 + 1 is 2 or this is how you approach a difficult problem. There isn't a lot of explanation on how you extrapolate that outside of that test that you just took.
Yeah.
And so, I think that that's super, super cool. My last question, I think maybe, unless you answer this really well, is that how does that impact your staff and teachers?
Yeah.
We talked a lot about the kids, but I would love to know how the staff and teachers are buying into this motto as the mentor, as the facilitator and teacher, and all of that.
Yeah, so I'll first say we'll have some exciting announcements on this front coming up this spring, and we'd love to share that with you and circle back, and I'm sort of biting my tongue not to talk about that now. We know we need to reimagine the role of the teacher to do this well. That means not that, students make all the choices during the day. Teachers structure a box for students to work in. You can think about it like that. And the younger you are and the less skilled you are at making decisions, the smaller that box is, because the outcome has to be that you're learning, right? And over time, that box gets a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger. And so I think we found teachers who are most successful at Kairos have really strong core instructional practices. That's not a question. We have to teach at some point, how do you do long division? And if you don't know how to explain that in a way that's effective for kids, you're not going to be a good teacher at Kairos or anywhere else, right? What we're asking our teachers to layer on is to think of themselves as a coach and a mentor. So when a student is not there, you don't just say, no, it's this. This is what you should do, right? Just copy this down. It's, okay, tell me how you got there. Okay, interesting. Why did you make that decision versus this decision? And get them reflecting. Okay, when you do that, what is the outcome that you get? What's the outcome that you want? Okay, so we're not there. So let's go back. And it's talking through it with kids in that way that helps them to see and demonstrate their own thinking. That's, I think, what makes a successful classroom teacher at Kairos. What makes a really successful staff member overall is someone who balances that with the understanding that their job is to help a human being grow up, right? And become the person they want to be, and that happens through our mentoring and our advisory structure, that your job is not just to sit here and teach math. It's to help inspire, empower, coach, develop, see these holistic sides of a student that aren't just, how good are they on a math test, but what are the kinds of choices they can make? Who do they want to be? What do they care about? What does their family care about? And that's, I don't think that's a mindset shift for everyone, but it is for some people. And so there's a certain kind of person who's really excited by that.
So
and we're lucky to have them.
at Kairos, you have to be willing to grow.
You have to be willing to grow personally, because we're asking you to do something a little bit differently, for sure.
I don't even think that. I like the way that you're describing it is as an adult, you have to be willing to grow. You have to be willing to grow as much as your students are growing, because you can't come in with your set schedule and this is how everything is going to be and do. You have to be able to adjust your knowledge to the cognition base of the student that you're working with, and you have to be willing to question your own practices to help them understand how they develop that executive function and all of those things. And so I don't know, maybe I just blew your mind.
Yeah,
but that's definitely what I picked up when you were talking, is that in order to be a good teacher in this environment, you have to be able to grow and expand with your students as well. Yeah. Or you might become angry or ineffective, because it could be really challenging to have to Johnny has 4 apples and know that like that's not going to be the thing that ultimately helps them get to the next level just because they got the right answer.
And I don't want to misspeak here, because there are lots of teachers using these practices in lots of schools, right? There are amazing teachers inside their domain doing this kind of thing. If you want to be a part of a school where the systems and structures of the school are designed to help you do that with kids, right? That it's built into who we are and not just something you have to do in a silo, like those are the people who are really happy with us.
Awesome. All right. And how do people find you? When can they apply for Kairos?
Yeah, absolutely. So applications are live now. We'll have a lottery this spring. I believe it's in March. I can get the exact date and send. Right? Yeah. Yes. So we're on the Common School app. So you can find us there. If you preference us number 1, that makes it more likely that you get in the lottery and all that good stuff. But if you want to come and visit, we have open houses every month. You can find us on our website, kairosacademies.org, all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, however you want to connect with us. Kairos. There are no other schools in St. Louis with that strange name. So you can get at us for sure. And if you have more questions, we encourage folks, email us directly. It's first.last name at kairosacademies.org for anyone you want to talk to, and they're all on the website. We're an open book.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for talking to us about your school. And you guys enjoy the rest of your day.